what really happened to Pharaoh Akhenaten, aka Amenhotep IV. Did you know that Akhenaten, aka Amenhotep IV, was named the heretic king and was one of the most controversial pharaohs ever to rule Egypt? He established the first known monotheistic state religion in the history of the world and severed many relationships with the majority of our friends to shift the core of Egyptian society to embrace a new way of life on this new religion. Due to this, he faced defamation and was erased from many historical records. Let's dig deep into the pages of history and see what really happened to Pharaoh Akhenaten, aka Amenhotep IV. Early reign as Amenhotep IV. Conflict arose between Amenhotep III of Amen, the patron deity of Thebes. The priests had risen to prominence earlier in the 18th dynasty, particularly under Hatshepsut and Thutmose III, as all the main temples of Amun, including the Karnak temple, were located in Thebes. These pharaohs lavishly donated riches to Amun's priests. Amenhotep III, his father, aimed to curtail the growing influence of the priesthood, but he was unable to because of his untimely passing. Clash with the clan of Amun. When Amenhotep IV came to power at the very end of the 18th dynasty, ancient Egypt was a military and economic superpower with solid international ties. He reigned from 1353 BC to 1336 BC. After 5 years in power, Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten, instituted monotheism to combat entrenched authority and curb corruption among the powerful priesthoods, bureaucracy, and nobility. Being a Khorijan in his father's reign, he also had been a victim of the rising power of the Amen priesthood. Introducing monotheism. This is when Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten, which means follower of Aten, one and only God. He drastically changed Egyptian theology away from the traditional gods to a monotheistic god. After more than 2,000 years of polytheism, Akhenaten saw the need to unify the Egyptian people under the deity Aten to put a stop to the ascendant Amun culture. These Amun temples had more territory than the pharaoh did. He banned the traditional religion in the 9th year of his reign. He even forcibly banned religious rites and closed all the temples. He ordered the name of Amen to be removed from all of Egypt's temples and moved the former capital Thebes to the new capital Horizon of Aten in modern Amarna. Amarna Revolution. Amenhotep IV instituted significant improvements in the field of religion, architecture, and art during the first few years of his reign. He established many new temples for the deity Aten, close to the temples of Amen, centered in the Karnak area. In addition, Aten was no longer shown as an anthropomorphic figure, but rather as the sun's disk itself, raised to the sky and casting its many beams down onto the royal family. Each ray came to an end in a small hand that the Aten may use to give the king and queen the sign of life, or even to grasp their limbs and crowns. Amenhotep IV's devotion to the Aten was celebrated through the presentation of foodstuffs on a large number of offering tables and made in public. Whereas priorly traditional rituals prescribed for the majority of Egyptian deities were performed in small, dimly lit sanctuaries in the deepest corners of the temples. The Aten temples at Karnak were made up of multiple huge outdoor courts. Massive sculptures of the king were leaning up against the pillars of the roofed porticos that surrounded these courtyards. The new temples were constructed completely of relatively tiny, uniform-sized blocks of sandstone known as talatat, ostensibly for speed in construction. The decline of imperial glory. Unfortunately, much of Egypt's imperial splendor began to fade during the pharaoh's reign. He discontinued international military campaigns and slowed down Egypt's military defenses throughout his rule. His religious views diverged from those of the conventional ancient Egyptian religion. He relocated to Amarna with his family from Thebes. While in Amarna, Egypt's situation deteriorated. He disregarded foreign affairs and permitted the invasion of lands. He was further removed and cut off from his people's issues by the fact he was in Amarna rather than the capital city. The monotheistic faith was rejected by many ancient Egyptians. Instead of the many gods they were accustomed to worshiping, they found it difficult to accept one. In contrast to Aten, which is simply light, which they found too ethereal to understand, their ancient gods were real and observable. As the old gods were no longer revered, the ancient Egyptians started to worry about the stability of their afterlife. Many ancient Egyptians experienced a decline in their standard of living and closed their doors after Akhenaten declared worship of all other gods punishable. Many of the people who practiced religion in ancient Egypt struggled to make a living. Most of them were carvers of wood and those who made scarabs, who used to make idols of Amen and other ancient gods. Death of Akhenaten. It's difficult to pinpoint the end of Akhenaten's reign, as no records have been found about his death, since this is the latest date that has been documented for the monarch. His death most likely occurred in his 17th regnal year. First of all, it's not known exactly what caused Akhenaten's death, primarily because it's not known for sure whether or not his remains have been found. What happened to Akhenaten's remains is a mystery because the royal tomb meant for him at Amarna was empty and there was no royal burial there. It is believed that the skeleton that was discovered in tomb KV55 in the Valley of the Kings may belong to Akhenaten, as it consisted some artifacts from the Amarna period. Royal Tomb of Akhenaten. Akhenaten's royal tomb, also known as Tomb 55 in the Valley of the Kings, was discovered in the late 19th century, around 1344 BC. Work on the tomb started, and it was finished under Akhenaten's rule. With the exception of having extra burial chambers for various members of Akhenaten's family, his tomb mostly mirrored other typical tombs in the Valley of the Kings during the period. Usually, the hallways of other tombs had curves, but Akhenaten's tomb featured a straight main hallway. A pink coffin with Nefertiti's defending arms outstretched at the corners was discovered within the tomb, but the mummy of Akhenaten was missing. Most of the items in Akhenaten's royal tomb were destroyed during the raid on the tomb. 2 sarcophagi parts, along with their lids, remnants of an alabaster canopic box, and 200 Shabti figurines were among the items discovered within the royal tomb. Even now, it is unknown where King Akhenaten's remains are. Erasing Akhenaten traces of attempts defaming Akhenaten. Shortly after Akhenaten's death, Smenkhara wed the eldest daughter of Akhenaten, but his reign did not last long. King Tut, who was just 8 years old, ascended to power following Smenkhara's rule. The priests of Amen were desperate to regain religious authority after the death of King Akhenaten. The Egyptian populace likewise wanted to return to their regular lives. When King Tut assumed control, Amarna, the new religious capital of Akhenaten, was abandoned, and Memphis was restored as the nation's religious capital. Amarna, once an impressive metropolis, was abandoned and remained in ruins amid the desert for years. Akhenaten and his heretical faith had by this point completely vanished from history. Even the king's name was taken off all listings of recognized pharaohs. The temples built by Akhenaten were destroyed, and the stone from these temples was used to build other monuments. It took several pharaohs, including Ramses the Great, his son Tutankhamun, and the former commander Horemheb, to undo the harm that Akhenaten's radical regime had done. His monuments were destroyed, his Aten temples were destroyed, and the stone was taken to rebuild traditional deity temples. He was wiped out of history as a heretic and adversary of ancient Egypt. This is what really happened to Akhenaten, aka Amenhotep IV. Thanks for watching. Like this video, give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe. Turn on your bell icon so you don't miss out on any other videos just like this.